April 8, 1942. The heat shimmers across Hamadan railway station in Persia. Sergeant Peter Prendis watches another convoy rumble past, his uniform soaked with sweat. He's 46 years old. 3 years in Siberian gulags have left him hollow-eyed and gaunt. His wife and children are somewhere in Soviet-occupied Poland. He has no idea if they're alive. Around him, Polish soldiers mill about in the afternoon heat. Men freed from Soviet camps just months ago, part of General Ander's newly formed army. Refugees without a country. Private Henryk Zakharevich calls out from near the tracks. "Sergeant, you need to see this." A ragged Persian boy stands there, maybe 12 years old, clutching a burlap sack. His clothes are torn, face smudged with dirt, eyes desperate with hunger. The boy opens the sack, just enough for them to glimpse inside. A tiny mass of brown fur, whimpering softly, barely moving. Zakharevich kneels for a closer look. It's a bear cub, can't be more than a few weeks old. Where's his mother? The boy makes a shooting gesture with his hands, mimicking a rifle. The soldiers understand without translation. Hunters killed the mother. This orphan won't survive another day without help. The boy wants food. Anything. He'll trade the cub for whatever they can spare. Prendis stares at the tiny creature. Its eyes are barely open, weak, dehydrated, struggling to breathe. Every logical part of him says, walk away. The Polish army is barely functioning. They're refugees themselves. Barely enough rations to feed the men. A bear cub is the last thing they need. But something in those small, frightened eyes reaches through 3 years of horror. Touches something Prendis thought he'd lost, the ability to care about something helpless. Maybe it's because his own children are trapped in Soviet-occupied Poland. Maybe it's because this tiny bear is as lost as every soldier here. Maybe it just matters. Zakharevich pulls out his Swiss Army knife. Another soldier offers a tin of canned beef. A third produces a chocolate bar, probably saved for weeks. They hand it all to the Persian boy. He grabs the items and runs before they can change their minds. The soldiers stand there with a dying bear cub. What they don't know, what nobody could possibly know on this sweltering Persian afternoon, is what they've just started. This bear will fight at Monte Cassino, carry artillery shells under German fire, become a corporal in the Polish army, change hundreds of lives. His story will symbolize Polish resilience for generations, but first they have to keep him alive. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company had left the Soviet Union 2 months earlier. To understand how Polish soldiers ended up in Persia, you need to understand where they'd been. September 17, 1939. The Soviet Union invaded eastern Poland. Germany had already attacked from the west 2 weeks earlier. Poland, caught between two totalitarian powers, ceased to exist. The Soviets immediately began rounding up Polish officers, soldiers, civilians, anyone who might resist, anyone who represented Polish independence. Over 190,000 soldiers captured and sent to camps. Tens of thousands more civilians were deported, shipped to labor camps in Siberia, Kazakhstan, and the far reaches of the Soviet Union, families torn apart in cattle cars. Sergeant Prendis was among them, arrested in October 1939, separated from his family, shipped east in freight cars where men died standing up. He spent 2 years in camps where temperatures dropped to -40 Celsius, where men died from starvation, disease, exhaustion, where 15-hour workdays left prisoners too weak to stand. The Soviet guards made it clear, you're not prisoners of war, you're criminals, enemies of the Soviet people. You'll work until you die. Then on June 22, 1941, everything changed. Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa shattered the Nazi-Soviet pact. Suddenly, Stalin needed allies. On July 30, 1941, the Soviets signed an agreement with the Polish government in exile. the Sikorsky-Maysky Agreement. On August 12, Stalin announced an amnesty for Polish citizens. Tens of thousands of prisoners were told they were free, but freedom in the Soviet Union was relative. Released prisoners had no money, no food, no transportation. Many were hundreds of miles from any recruitment point. The Soviets provided no assistance whatsoever. If you wanted to join Anders's army, you had to get there yourself. Thousands died on the journey. Dysentery killed children who'd survived 2 years in camps. For those who survived, salvation came in the form of General Władysław Anders. Released from Moscow's Lubyanka prison, tasked with forming a Polish military force. By December 1941, he had 25,000 men. But the Soviets wouldn't provide adequate food, clothing, weapons. Stalin wanted Anders to send starving soldiers into battle immediately. Anders refused. After months of negotiations, Stalin agreed to evacuate the Polish forces to Persia. Between March and August 1942, over 74,000 Polish soldiers crossed the Caspian Sea. They arrived in terrible condition, malnourished, disease-ridden, many too weak to walk. But they were out, under British command now. They had a chance to fight. It was during this journey south that Prendis and his unit encountered the Persian boy with the burlap sack. Back at the makeshift camp near Hamadan, the soldiers faced their first challenge. How do you feed a 3-week-old bear cub? Zakharevich found an empty vodka bottle. They filled it with condensed milk, diluted with water. Fashioned the makeshift teat from cloth wrapped around the bottle's mouth. Prendis held the tiny cub in his arms, trying to get it to drink. The cub was so weak it couldn't even suckle properly. For the first 24 hours, they weren't sure it would survive. But slowly the cub began to respond. It drank a little, then more. By the 3rd day, it was crying for food. The soldiers took that as a good sign. By the end of the week, the tiny bear was drinking an entire bottle. The soldiers started calling him Wojtek. It's a diminutive of the Polish name Wojciech, meaning joyful warrior or happy warrior. For men who'd spent years in Soviet camps, who'd watched friends die from starvation, the name carried weight. This tiny creature represented something they'd almost forgotten. Joy, hope, the possibility that something good could still exist in a world gone mad. Captain Antony Tsiolkovsky discovered Wojtek 2 weeks later. His initial reaction was predictable. What the hell is a bear cub doing in my camp? Prendis explained. The cub was an orphan. They couldn't leave it to die. They'd been taking care of it with their own rations. Tsiolkovsky should have ordered them to get rid of it immediately. Military regulations were clear. No pets, no mascots, no animals in military encampments. But Tsiolkovsky had also spent time in Soviet camps. He looked at the tiny bear sleeping peacefully in Prendis' arms. He looked at his men gathered around like protective parents. He saw something in their faces he hadn't seen since before the invasion. Purpose. Connection. Something to care about besides their own survival. Fine, Tsiolkovsky said. But Prendis, you're responsible for it. It eats from your rations. If it causes problems, it goes. Understood? Yes, sir? The men broke into grins as the captain walked away, muttering about running a circus instead of an artillery company. What Tsiolkovsky understood, what he'd never articulate in reports, was that his men needed Wojtek as much as Wojtek needed them. These were soldiers who'd lost everything: families, homes, country, dignity. They'd been treated as less than human. They'd watched friends die from treatable diseases. Wojtek gave them something to protect, something innocent that depended on them completely, something that couldn't be taken away by Stalin or Hitler. The bear became the unit's collective child. As the company moved from Persia to Iraq that summer, Wojtek moved with them. At first, Prendis carried him. The cub was small enough to fit in his backpack, head poking out like a curious puppy. But bear cubs grow fast, really fast. By the time they reached Iraq, Wojtek weighed 20 pounds. By Syria that fall, £50. By Palestine in winter, £90. The soldiers adapted their routines. Wojtek slept in Prendy's tent initially, then in his own wooden crate. Then he decided he preferred sleeping with the soldiers. They'd wake to find a 100-pound bear curled up between them, like an enormous dog. Nobody complained. He ate with the soldiers. First condensed milk and honey, then fruit, marmalade, whatever sweets they could spare. Eventually, he ate whatever the soldiers ate. He developed a particular fondness for beer. The first time someone offered him a bottle, expecting him to reject it, Wojtek drank the entire thing. The soldiers quickly learned to monitor his consumption. A drunk bear was nobody's idea of a good time. He also developed a taste for cigarettes, but not in the way you'd expect. When soldiers lit cigarettes, Wojtek wanted one too. They'd hand him a lit cigarette. He'd take it in his paw, bring it to his mouth, take one puff, then swallow it whole. The soldiers tried to explain that's not how smoking works. Wojtek didn't care. To him, cigarettes were snacks that burned a little going down. The unit veterinarian was horrified. "You're giving a bear cigarettes?" The soldiers shrugged. "He won't eat unless we give him one." But Wojtek's habits went beyond food and cigarettes. He developed distinctly military behaviors nobody taught him. He learned to march. When the unit conducted formation drills, Wojtek watched from the sidelines. Then one day, he simply joined the formation, walking on his hind legs, in step with the soldiers. Zacharich swore the bear kept better formation than half the recruits. Wojtek learned to salute. When Prendys taught him to wave his paw, Wojtek modified the gesture, something resembling a military salute. Soon, when officers approached, Wojtek would stand on his hind legs, raise his right paw in greeting. The officers, unsure how to respond, usually returned the gesture. He learned to ride in trucks, at first in the cab with Prendys, head hanging out the window like a dog. Locals would do double takes as a Polish army truck drove past, with a bear's head sticking out the window. As Wojtek grew larger, he moved to the truck bed. He didn't mind. He stood in back, paws on the side rail, surveying the landscape. More than anything, Wojtek loved water. In the desert heat of the Middle East, water was precious and rationed. The shower tent had strict usage limits. Wojtek discovered the showers early. He figured out how to turn on the water himself. He'd slip in when nobody was looking and spend hours under the cold spray. The soldiers assigned guards to keep him out. But one afternoon in Palestine, the shower tent was left unguarded for 10 minutes. Wojtek seized the opportunity. He was enjoying his unauthorized shower when he heard someone else enter. A man, moving quietly, trying not to be heard. Wojtek peered around the curtain. An Arab man was searching through the soldiers' belongings, looking for weapons, ammunition, anything to steal. When Wojtek stood to his full height and roared, the man screamed so loudly half the camp came running. They found the would-be thief on the ground, hands raised in surrender, babbling incoherently about a monster in the showers. Wojtek stood over him, dripping wet, looking quite pleased with himself. Chelkovsky interviewed the terrified thief, then turned to Prendys. "Your bear just caught a spy. Does this mean he can have unlimited shower time?" Chelkovsky sighed. "Fine. And given 2 bottles of beer." The men cheered. Wojtek became a camp hero. From that day forward, he had unlimited access to showers, and a standing beer ration that made him the envy of the company. As 1943 progressed, the 22nd Company prepared for deployment. The Polish Second Corps was being integrated into the British 8th Army for Italy. In January 1944, they received orders, shipping out from Alexandria, Egypt, to Naples, Italy. They joined Allied forces attempting to capture Rome. Everyone was excited. Finally, after years of exile, imprisonment, training, they'd get to fight the Germans, strike back at the enemy that destroyed Poland. There was just one problem. British military regulations were absolutely clear. No mascots, no pets, no animals on military vessels. When Tsiolkovsky informed his men of this regulation, the reaction was immediate and unanimous. Then Wojtek stays, and so do we. The captain tried to reason with them. You can't disobey orders because of a bear. The men were unmoved. Sir, with respect, Wojtek's been with us for 2 years. He's one of us. We're not leaving him behind. The soldiers who'd survived Soviet camps, walked across deserts, lost everything, drew their line here. They would not abandon their bear. Tsiolkovsky understood. He'd grown as attached as his men. But he also understood military reality. If they refused to board, court-martial. If they smuggled Wojtek aboard, court-martial. If they left Wojtek in Egypt, the bear would probably be shot as a dangerous animal. There had to be another solution. Prindis came up with it. Sir, the regulations say no pets or mascots. Correct. That's correct. What if Wojtek isn't a pet? What if he's a soldier? Tsiolkovsky stared at him. You want to enlist a bear in the Polish army? Why not, sir? He's been with us 2 years. He follows orders better than half the recruits. He's caught spies. He marches in formation. If he's officially enlisted with rank and serial number, he's not a mascot. He's a soldier. The regulations can't stop a soldier from boarding. Tsiolkovsky realized Prendis was right. The British regulations were designed to prevent pets, but they said nothing about officially enlisted military personnel. It was bureaucratic judo, using the regulations against themselves. Tsiolkovsky drafted the paperwork personally. On February 10, 1944, Wojtek was officially enlisted in the Polish Second Corps. Rank, private. Serial number assigned. Paybook issued. Rations authorized. Carry-takers Henryk Zakharevich and Dimitar Sholago. When the company arrived at Alexandria docks, a British port officer reviewed their documents. Name, he asked, reading from the manifest. Private Wojtek Perski, Tsiolkovsky replied, using Wojtek's formal enlisted name. Perski, meaning Persian, commemorated where they found him. Age, 2 years. Height, 5 feet 11 inches. Weight, 200 pounds. The port officer looked up from his clipboard. This soldier seems unusually large. Tsiolkovsky kept his face completely neutral. He's very well fed, sir. The officer looked past Tsiolkovsky at the soldiers waiting to board. One was standing on his hind legs, over 6 feet tall, covered in brown fur. The officer looked at his clipboard, at Wojtek, at Tsiolkovsky. After a long pause, he stamped the paperwork. Private Perski is cleared to board. Carry on. Behind him, the Polish soldiers struggled not to laugh. They'd done it, enlisted a bear in the army, and the British approved it. As they boarded, Prendis whispered to Wojtek in Polish, "You're a soldier now. Act like one." Wojtek, who understood far more Polish than anyone gave him credit for, stood a little straighter walking up the gangplank. The Italian campaign in early 1944 was a brutal stalemate. Allied forces had been fighting north toward Rome since landing in September. But the Germans had prepared defensive lines across the peninsula. The strongest was the Gustav Line, anchored by the town of Cassino, dominated by Monte Cassino, a 1,500-foot mountain topped with a Benedictine monastery. Between January and May, Allied forces launched 3 major assaults on Monte Cassino. All failed with horrific casualties. The U.S. 36th Division was decimated trying to cross the Rapido River in January. American bombers reduced the ancient monastery to rubble in February. They thought Germans were using it as an observation post. They weren't, until after the bombing. Then German paratroopers fortified the ruins. British, New Zealand, and Indian forces attacked in March. They gained yards measured in bodies. By April, Monte Cassino had become a symbol of Allied failure, a killing ground where tens of thousands died for strategic positions that changed hands daily. And still, the Germans held. General Anders and the Polish Second Corps arrived in Italy in February. British commanders initially wanted to split the Polish forces, distribute them among other Allied divisions. Anders refused. His men had survived Soviet camps together, evacuated across Persia together, trained together. They would fight as one unit, or not at all. In March, General Sir Oliver Leese, commander of the British Eighth Army, made Anders an offer. The Polish Second Corps could lead the fourth assault. It was not an honor. It was a suicide mission. 3 previous assaults had failed. The German 1st Parachute Division was elite. The terrain favored defenders completely. Casualties would be catastrophic, but Anders understood what success would mean for Poland. His country had been occupied since 1939. The Soviet Union now controlled eastern Poland, showed no signs of leaving. The world needed reminding that Poland still fought, that Polish soldiers would die for their homeland's freedom. Victory at Monte Cassino would earn Poland a voice at the post-war negotiating table. Anders accepted the mission. On May 11, 1944, the Fourth Battle of Monte Cassino began. 1,600 Allied guns opened fire simultaneously. The bombardment was so intense the ground shook 10 miles away. Under this artillery barrage, 2 Polish divisions began their assault. The 5th Kresowa and 3rd Carpathian Divisions. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company, including Private Wojtek, had a specific mission. Keep the Polish guns firing no matter what. The German defensive positions were designed to target supply routes. Artillery spotters could see every road leading to Polish gun positions. The moment supply trucks appeared, German mortars and artillery rained down. Driving these routes required navigating hairpin mountain roads in pitch darkness, without headlights. One wrong turn meant plunging hundreds of feet. One moment of hesitation meant death. The 22nd Company's trucks carried wooden crates of 25-pound artillery shells. Each crate weighed 100 pounds, required 4 men to carry safely. At the gun positions, crews unloaded as quickly as possible, then raced back down the mountain for more ammunition. The work was backbreaking, dangerous, absolutely critical. Without ammunition, the Polish guns would fall silent. Without guns, the infantry would die in even greater numbers. On the first night of battle, Wojtek watched soldiers unloading ammunition crates. He'd seen this during training, but never under combat conditions. Never with explosions lighting up the sky, never with machine gun fire echoing off mountains, never with the smell of cordite and burning flesh. The soldiers expected Wojtek to be terrified. He was a bear. Bears have acute hearing. The noise should have sent him fleeing. Instead, Wojtek did something nobody anticipated. He walked up to the truck where soldiers were unloading, stood on his hind legs, held out his front paws. Zakharevich, not understanding, stared at him. Wojtek gestured more insistently, the same way he did when he wanted soldiers to toss him oranges during grenade practice. Then Zakharevich understood. He wants to help. The soldiers looked at each other. Standing orders were to keep Wojtek away from the front lines. He was officially a soldier, but not expected in combat. But here he was, volunteering. Zakharevich picked up 100-pound ammunition crate, placed it in Wojtek's outstretched paws. The bear took the crate, turned, walked on his hind legs to the ammunition stack 30 yards away, set it down carefully, never dropped it, returned to the truck for another load. For the next 4 hours, Wojtek carried ammunition crates. He moved faster than human soldiers because he didn't need brakes. He carried heavier loads. His strength allowed 2 crates while men struggled with 1. He never dropped a single shell, never fumbled a crate, never hesitated when German artillery landed nearby. British soldiers from an adjacent unit watched in disbelief. An artillery officer approached Chelkovsky. "Your men have a bear carrying ammunition." Chelkovsky, exhausted and covered in dust, replied without looking up. "Yes, sir. He's one of our best soldiers. Is there a problem?" The British officer opened his mouth. closed it, walked away shaking his head. By dawn on May 12th, the first day of battle, the Polish assault had stalled. German resistance was fiercer than anticipated. The 5th Kresowa Division, attacking Phantom Ridge in Point 593, had taken terrible casualties. The 3rd Carpathian Division's assault on Albaneta Farm was repulsed. General Anders faced a terrible decision. First day's casualties exceeded 1,000 killed and wounded. Continue, and losses would multiply. Withdrawal, and Monte Cassino remains in German hands. Another Allied failure. Anders ordered a temporary withdrawal to regroup. His men pulled back, carrying their wounded, leaving their dead on the slopes. They'd gained almost nothing, paid terribly for it. In the ammunition supply positions, Prendis found Wojtek lying beside an empty truck, paws covering his face. The bear hadn't eaten since battle started, hadn't drunk water, just kept carrying shells until the order came to withdraw. Now he lay there, shaking. Prendis sat beside him, put an arm around his massive shoulders. "I know, boy. I know it's terrible. We all feel it. But we have to keep going. We have to try again." Wojtek looked at him with eyes that seemed to understand more than a bear should. Then he stood up, shook himself, walked to where soldiers prepared rations. "Time to eat. Time to rest. Time to get ready to do it all again." For the next 6 days, the battle raged. Polish infantry attacked German positions in close combat that left no survivors. Men fought with bayonets, grenades, bare hands. The Germans, recognizing the Poles would never retreat, fought with equal desperation. Captured Polish officers were crucified with barbed wire, left to die in sight of their own lines. After that, neither side took prisoners. The fighting was so intense that veterans of the Eastern Front later said Monte Cassino was worse than anything in Russia. And through it all, the 22nd Company kept the guns firing. Every night, trucks laden with ammunition climbed the mountain roads. Every night, Wojtek carried crates of shells that kept Polish artillery hammering German positions. On May 17th, 6 days into battle, German commanders realized their position was untenable. British forces had broken through the Gustav Line at other points. The Germans at Monte Cassino were in danger of being cut off and surrounded. That night, under cover of a fierce counterattack, the 1st Parachute Division evacuated. They left behind 30 wounded soldiers, too injured to move. On the morning of May 18th, soldiers from the 12th Podolsky Lancers advanced cautiously toward the monastery ruins. They expected a trap, expected snipers, expected one final desperate defense. Instead, they found silence. The Germans were gone. Sergeant Antoni Wróblewski, commanding the lead patrol, climbed to the highest point of the ruins. From his pack, he pulled a makeshift Polish flag, white and red cloth, sewn together by hands that shook from exhaustion. At 0730 hours on May 18, 1944, the Polish flag was raised over Monte Cassino. 4 months of battle, 55,000 Allied casualties, 20,000 German casualties, and finally, victory. When news reached the 22nd Company, soldiers erupted in cheers. Men who hadn't smiled in weeks grabbed each other, dancing with exhaustion and relief. Someone handed Wojtek a bottle of beer. The bear drank it in one go, bellowed so loudly that soldiers 3 companies over looked up in alarm. Czelkowski gathered his men. In recognition of his service during the battle, Private Wojtek Perski is promoted to corporal. The official company insignia is changed to depict a bear carrying an artillery shell. This unit will henceforth be known as the Company of the Soldier Bear. The soldiers cheered again. Corporal Wojtek, seemingly understanding that something significant had happened, stood on his hind legs, saluted. The gesture was so perfectly timed that even hardened combat veterans laughed. In the following weeks, as the Allied advance continued, Corporal Wojtek became a celebrity. British and American generals visiting Polish positions insisted on seeing the bear. Journalists wrote features about the artillery bear of Monte Cassino. Newsreel footage showed Wojtek carrying shells, wrestling with soldiers, drinking beer. For a moment, amid the ongoing horror of World War II, a Syrian bear who'd become a Polish soldier gave people something to smile about. But the war was far from over. The Polish Second Corps continued fighting through the Italian campaign. They captured Ancona in July. They broke through the Gothic line in September. They fought at the Battle of Bologna in April 1945. Through it all, Wojtek and the 22nd Company supplied ammunition, moved supplies, kept the army functioning. On May 2, 1945, German forces in Italy surrendered. The war in Europe was effectively over. But for the Polish soldiers, there was no victory celebration. The Poland they'd fought to free no longer existed. The Soviet Union had occupied the entire country. The puppet communist government installed by Stalin made it clear. And his army were traitors. If they returned to Poland, they'd face imprisonment or execution. The soldiers who'd survived Soviet camps, walked across deserts, fought at Monte Cassino, learned they couldn't go home. Their families were behind the Iron Curtain. Years of sacrifice had changed nothing for Poland's freedom. In October 1945, the 22nd Company received orders. They were being relocated to Scotland. Britain was offering Polish soldiers who couldn't return home the option to settle in the United Kingdom. It was exile dressed up as hospitality. On October 26, 1946, Corporal Wojtek and 3,000 Polish soldiers arrived at Winfield Camp near Hutton in the Scottish borders. The camp, a former Royal Air Force training facility, would be their home until demobilization. For Wojtek, Scotland must have been bewildering. He'd spent 4 years in the Middle East's heat, 2 years in Italy's mountains. Now Scotland's cold grey weather. But the soldiers made sure he was comfortable. They built him a large wooden enclosure, continued his beer ration, walked with him through the countryside. Local Scottish children quickly discovered there was a bear at Winfield Camp. They'd come to the fence, and Wojtek would approach, gentle as a lamb. The soldiers would lift the smallest children onto his back for photos. Wojtek seemed to understand he should be careful around them. The Polish-Scottish Association made him an honorary member. Local newspapers ran features about the bear who'd fought at Monte Cassino. For 18 months, Corporal Wojtek lived at Winfield Camp, surrounded by the soldiers who'd raised him. But by November 1947, the camp was closing. Polish soldiers were being demobilized, released to start civilian lives in Britain or emigrate to other countries. Prendis, now 51 years old, faced a terrible decision. He couldn't keep Wojtek. The bear weighed nearly 500 pounds, stood over 6 feet tall. He couldn't live in a house, couldn't be released into the wild. He'd never developed survival skills. Wojtek had been raised by humans, only knew how to be a soldier. Prendis contacted Edinburgh Zoo. Could they take a Syrian brown bear that used to be a corporal in the Polish army? The zoo director initially thought it was a prank. Then Prendis sent documentation, official military records, photographs of Wojtek carrying ammunition at Monte Cassino, newspaper clippings about the soldier bear. The zoo agreed to take him. On November 15, 1947, Prendis loaded Wojtek into a truck for the 2-hour drive to Edinburgh. The bear seemed to sense something was wrong. He kept looking at Prendis, whimpering softly. Prendis held it together until they reached the zoo. Then, walking Wojtek to his new enclosure, surrounded by zoo staff who had no idea how to handle a bear that understood Polish military commands, Prendis broke down. "I'm so sorry, boy. I wish I could keep you with me, but I can't. This is the best I can do. You'll be safe here. You'll be fed. You'll be taken care of." Wojtek stood on his hind legs, put his paws on Prendis' shoulders, the gesture he'd done 1,000 times when playing with soldiers. Prendis hugged him, tears streaming down his face. Then he turned and walked away. If he'd looked back, he wouldn't have been able to leave. Wojtek lived 16 more years at Edinburgh Zoo. For the first few years, former soldiers from the 22nd Company visited regularly. They'd call to him in Polish. Wojtek would rush to the fence, recognizing their voices. The veterans would sneak him cigarettes which he'd swallow with obvious pleasure. They'd speak to him in Polish, tell him news about other soldiers, about where they'd settled, about their new lives. Wojtek would listen, making soft sounds, seeming to understand. Zoo visitors who didn't speak Polish would watch these interactions with confusion. Why does the bear get so excited when those men visit? Zoo staff would explain. He used to be a soldier. Those men were his unit. He still remembers them. As years passed, visits became less frequent. Veterans died or moved away. Families grew. Lives moved on. But Wojtek would still perk up whenever he heard Polish spoken nearby. He'd stand at the fence, looking hopeful, waiting for soldiers who came less and less often. On December 2nd, 1963, Wojtek died peacefully in his sleep. He was 21 years old, roughly the average lifespan for Syrian brown bears. At the time of his death, he weighed 1,100 pounds, stood over 6 feet tall, even on all fours. The zoo staff found him in the morning, lying in his favorite sleeping spot, looking peaceful. A few remaining Polish veterans heard the news. They came to the zoo, stood at the fence where Wojtek had lived for 16 years. Speaking quietly in Polish, one of them, now in his 70s, saluted. The others followed. A final salute for Corporal Wojtek, Syrian Brown Bear, Polish Army, 22nd Artillery Supply Company. Soldier, friend, and symbol of Polish resilience. The story should end there, with an old bear dying peacefully in a zoo, his war long over. But Wojtek's legacy was just beginning. In the decades after his death, Wojtek became more than a bear. He became a symbol of Polish-Scottish friendship, forged in the fires of World War II. In 2015, a bronze statue was unveiled in Edinburgh's Princes Street Gardens, created by sculptor Alan Beattie Herriot. It depicts Wojtek walking alongside a Polish soldier, both equals, both brothers in arms. The statue includes a relief panel showing 4 scenes from Wojtek's life: being found as a cub in Persia, carrying ammunition at Monte Cassino, living with soldiers at Winfield Camp, his final years at Edinburgh Zoo. Polish and Scottish officials attended the unveiling. 2 Polish veterans who'd known Wojtek personally were there, both in their 90s, both making the journey to honor their old friend. Additional statues followed: Krakow, Poland in 2014, Duns, Scotland in 2016, Cassino, Italy in 2019, at the foot of Monte Cassino, where a bear once carried shells under German fire. In 2017, Poznan, Poland, named a street Ulica Kaprala Wojtka, Corporal Wojtek Street. The street leads to Poznan Zoo, a fitting tribute. In Poland, Wojtek's story is taught in schools. Children learn about the orphaned bear who became a soldier, who fought for Poland's freedom, even though Poland wasn't his homeland. Adults who lived through communist rule see in Wojtek a reminder that Polish soldiers fought for freedom, even when that freedom was denied them. In Scotland, Wojtek represents the thousands of Polish soldiers and civilians who made Scotland home after the war, who couldn't return to Poland, but built new lives in a foreign land, who contributed to Scottish society while never forgetting where they came from. The Wojtek Memorial Trust created a special tartan, incorporating Polish and Scottish colours, worn at commemorative events, a visible symbol of friendship between nations. But beyond the statues and streets and official commemorations, Wojtek's real legacy lives in the stories. Stories veterans told their children and grandchildren. About a tiny bear cub saved from certain death in Persian mountains. About soldiers who'd lost everything but could still care about something helpless. About a bear that learned to march, to salute, to carry ammunition when men around him died. About the bond between human and animal that transcended language, species, and the horror of war. One veteran, interviewed shortly before his death, put it best. "We were all orphans in that war, separated from families, from home, from everything we knew. Wojtek was an orphan too. Maybe that's why we understood each other. We were all just trying to survive in a world that didn't want us." The strange thing about Wojtek's story is that it's absolutely true. Every detail, from the vodka bottle feeding to the ammunition carrying to the final years at Edinburgh Zoo, documented in military records, photographs, eyewitness accounts. In an age when fabricated stories spread faster than truth, Wojtek's story requires no embellishment. A Syrian brown bear really did become a soldier, really did fight at one of World War II's bloodiest battles, really did carry 100-pound crates of artillery shells under fire, never dropped one, really did get officially promoted to corporal for his service, really did live out his days in a Scottish zoo, still responding to Polish commands, still recognizing veterans who visited decades after the war ended. But the deeper truth of Wojtek's story isn't about a bear. It's about what humans do when everything is taken from them. The Polish soldiers who found Wojtek had survived Soviet camps, where guards told them they'd die forgotten. They'd walked across deserts where friends died from diseases that basic medicine could have cured. They'd been told their country no longer existed, that their families were lost, that their sacrifice meant nothing. They could have become bitter, cruel, broken. Instead, they found a dying bear cub and decided to save it. They shared their limited rations. They fashioned a bottle from whatever they could find. They took turns caring for something that couldn't possibly repay them. They chose kindness when kindness seemed pointless. That choice to care about something helpless in the middle of war, that's what makes Wojtek's story matter. Not that a bear learned to carry ammunition, but that men who had every reason to stop caring chose to care about a bear. And maybe Wojtek did understand in his own way. Maybe that's why he stayed with soldiers instead of running into the woods. Remember Wojtek. Remember the soldiers who saved him. Remember that even in your darkest moment, you can still choose kindness. That choice might just save you both.